Welcome to the Sustainable Living Podcast. Tips, tools, and tactics for living a heart-centered life that honors Mother Earth and her inhabitants. The information shared on the Sustainable Living Podcast reflects the opinions of host Marian West, Janice Fryatt, and their guests. Please use your own discretion in research before applying any information to your individual situation. Now, here are your hosts, Marian and Janice.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm Janice Fryatt, and today we'll be talking about an important solution to problems brought about by our reliance on industrial agriculture. But first, I'd like to take a moment to thank you all for the sustainable living tips and comments you've been sending us via email. Yay, you guys rock. Email, Facebook, and Instagram. You've been sending these tips and comments, and we really appreciate them. Your ideas and feedback are going to be a regular feature of this podcast going forward. And we're at the stage right now where the input isn't overwhelming, which means the chances of your comment or tip getting aired are almost 100%. So please keep them coming. Your support on Patreon helps to make this podcast more sustainable, and if you'd like to sign up to contribute as little as $1 per month there, just go to patreon.com and type the Sustainable Living Podcast in the search bar and follow the directions from there. The growing number of downloads that we're getting from you all has also helped us gain attention from potential sponsors. And this also helps us to become more sustainable, and we really thank you for that as well. Now, for this episode of the podcast, have you guys ever thought about owning or working on a small sustainable farm? Have you ever been looking for new ways to source your food from local, sustainably oriented sources? Or have you ever wondered if there are any innovative business models small businesses can use to level the playing field a bit with big corporations? On today's episode, which happens to be episode 106 of the podcast, I speak with an author that may have some answers for you. Her name is Elvira de Brigitte. Elvira and her family moved to California's Capay Valley 17 years ago, which led her to gain an insider's view of farming as a business. Her book, Why We Farm: Stories from Farmers of the Capay Valley, profiles small family farms in the area, highlighting the challenges and rewards of modern independent farming. It's a really interesting discussion with some surprising tips I think you might find interesting. So without further ado, here's that interview. Welcome, Elvira.
Thanks so much, Denise. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
First, we always like to kind of get to know our guests on the podcast. So could you share a little bit of your journey with us? What brought you to this place in your life with regard to sustainable farming and to writing your book?
Yeah, well, it all really started with a search for fresh, wholesome food after my first child was born about 25 years ago. And I grew up in the Bay Area around Berkeley, California, and even there, it was really hard back then to find good organic food. It wasn't just widely available in grocery stores. So I started dreaming of living in the country and having my own food sources, and traveled around a lot in my 20s looking for the right place. So that was when I was living in Hawaii and up and down California, and I was looking for a place that had fresh food, good water, and strong community. And circumstances led me to come to Capay Valley. My husband and I at the time were looking to build a retreat center, and while it hasn't happened yet, we've just found Capay Valley to be a really down-to-earth place with a lot of practical progressives, slowly gaining ground here. And yeah, it's been 17 years that I've lived here, which a while ago I realized, oh, this is the longest I've ever lived in one location my whole life. So I'm getting older. But
Well, I relate to that, and I think a lot of our listeners will as well. It's so funny how so many of our guests really come to this with basically nutrition for their family in mind. They're trying to deal with just making sure that their family has healthy food that doesn't have poison in it, but also often our kids or us or our husbands or wives or whoever are having issues with the food that they're eating. So we go off on a quest trying to find something that's going to clean up the diet and make everybody healthy, and then we end up here on the sustainable living path. Right. So that's exciting, and I do feel like a lot of people are going to relate to that. So you've gotten quite a bird's eye view of this healthy food production arena. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about, before we get to the good stuff, but on a worldwide scale, let's talk a little bit about what's the problem here. Why is it so hard for us to find food that doesn't have poison and is nutrition? What's going on with food production worldwide?
Well, yeah, I think concentration of capital is one of the biggest problems, and of course it affects many areas of our life. But for agriculture, since the 1950s, we've seen, just big, agribusiness, really spreading, and then the government policies that are either a result of that concentration or, chicken and the egg there, but it makes it really hard for small farmers to operate. And yeah, when people are used to having, abundant, cheap food available, that just creates a whole paradigm that, it's just the domino effect where farmers are then pressured into, always providing cheaper and cheaper food, and then that makes it really difficult for them to be good stewards of the land.
Yeah, well, and I don't think much of the time when you're talking about industrial agriculture, being a good steward of the land really doesn't enter into it. From what I've seen. Now, you could tell me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to me that the main and sole purpose of all of that is just higher profits. And it's kind of built into our system that when you have a business, you kind of have to continue to create, especially if it's incorporated, you have to create higher profits for your shareholders, even if it harms the land. I know that's one thing I've discovered that's a big issue, is just your priorities. But when you bring that idea of being a good steward of the land into it, well then you have to come at it from a whole different perspective. We're still dealing with much of industrial agriculture. They don't even get that that's a big, a thing that's important. I think maybe they are. Have you found that to be the case? I mean, you looking around, do you think people are starting to wake up and realize how important it is to become good stewards of the land?
Well, I see that in some ways. Like I see on my cereal boxes sometimes these profiles of farmers who, of course I'm buying organic cereal, so, but, it is a small and hopefully growing population of people who are really seeing the importance of that. As I got further into this project of writing this book, I just really realized how much, farmers need that understanding from the public, the small farmers I'm talking about. Yeah, I totally agree with you that, in the big industrial agriculture, that it's just mostly about profit, although I guess there are probably individual farmers, wrapped up in that who are, wishing that it was different.
It is, and I also do agree that just the rise of more and more organic products out there and the rising demand for it would kind of indicate that more people are thinking along those lines of being good stewards of the land and also being good stewards of people, which follows, because feeding poison to our population is not being very good steward of the population either. So let's go back a little bit to these small farms, because I suspect that you feel similar to the way that I feel, that the salvation of our food production is looking more and more like it rests with these smaller farms that are innovating and using less harmful ways of producing food. What's been going on? Now, obviously, the small family farm has been a tradition in the United States for generations. Can you get a little bit more specific about why they've been under siege?
It is definitely, there's regulations in place that make it harder for family farms. Yeah, it really comes back again to this kind of concentration of capital and policies being made mostly for large ag. For example, mechanization of farming is often touted as like something that will, really help all around for farmers to be able to produce food more cheaply. But that just, the capital to buy those machines can be really prohibitive for a small farmer, especially a farmer that's just starting out. I think it's just kind of this, culture of cheap food being available that the public can benefit from that in certain ways, with home budgets, but there's, really a wider effect that it has on the economy and on the environment.
You mentioned a couple of things here that I would like to kind of circle back to, but first, cheap food being available, how we all have gotten very used to having an abundance of cheap food available in our supermarkets. Obviously we've all thought that was a very good thing, and I think that's what modern agriculture was really built to create, an abundance of this cheap food. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of costs that are involved there that we pay in other ways. Maybe we don't pay at the supermarket, but we pay at the doctor's office, or we pay for pollution cleanup, or we pay in depleted soil so that there's less and less soil that's good, fertile soil that we can use in the future. Mother Earth pays. There's so many ways that we do pay for this cheap, abundant food. And I think people don't realize that. If we were to actually include these costs in the price of the food itself, it would be completely cost prohibitive. Everyone would be growing their own garden, okay? Because it would just be too expensive to go to the store. So that's something I think we really need to keep in mind. Getting back to the small farmers, you also mentioned concentration of capital. Could you be a little more specific about what you mean by concentration of capital and how that adversely affects small farmers?
Well, I could, like I said, the example of mechanization that's really expensive for a small farmer who doesn't have a lot of capital to operate their farm with. So then maybe as a result of not having, the latest harvesting machines, that small farmer might find that even though they have a great crop of, let's say, cherries, they don't have the labor to go and pick those, or maybe the labor is too expensive because, the regulations on a minimum wage, that's a whole other topic. But the farmer loses a crop because there's no one to help with harvest, then they're not going to grow that crop again, possibly. And so then, we're seeing like a whole change in the availability of local food. And we become dependent as a country on foreign markets. And, maybe we're just growing almonds and olives. That's the two big crops that are really coming in California right now. And we're selling those to foreign markets, and then meanwhile, we might have to buy other food from other areas internationally if we're not growing them here. So that's that's a big problem and really puts the small farmer at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine, going back to that term, concentration of capital, but meaning my interpretation of that, and maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but just basically the availability of money it's just more available to big corporations than it is to the small farms who don't come to it with a big source of funding that the corporations have. And often it's much easier for bigger organizations to get loans and to have business benefits that they may get that a small farmer does not get. And also what comes to mind is just the idea of globalism, as you were saying before, when we're importing and exporting to different countries, internationally, we're having to compete with companies that are paying the people so very, very little. It's almost impossible to be able to compete.
Right. Well, so that's happening, all over. And in Cape Valley, there's been a real effort to change that paradigm and to keep expanding the creativity that people have found here for ways to keep their small farms alive.
Oh, I'm excited to get into that. But before we do, I just wanted to circle back a little bit here and ask you, who are you trying to reach with the book? And what's your central message with Why We Farm, Stories from the Farmers of the Cape Valley?
Yeah, at first I was really trying to reach out to, curious customers and people who dream about, going back to the land and having a farm. And then as I got further into the project, I realized, like I said, that farmers are really needing more understanding from the wider public, and that if we're going to save small farms in the U.S., we really need to understand how they work and what we as a public can do to support small farmers and what policymakers can do to really help sustain this knowledge and the rural way of life.
Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful way of life. What surprised you most as you began to learn about sustainable farming?
I think one of the first things was just to see how people are, really embracing the life that they have here. And, I didn't meet a lot of farmers who were bitter about their career choices. Even though there's a lot of challenges, they're also, really feeling invigorated by their work and passionate, And then one thing that really surprised me also was this need for constant innovation on a small farm, always looking to understand market trends or looking for ways to save costs and be more environmentally sustainable. So I hadn't realized that at first, just how much innovation and creativity that goes into keeping these small farms going.
Well, that's what they always say, necessity is the mother of invention. And I'm sure when you have fewer of these, as we were speaking before, the bigger farms have a lot of advantages that the smaller farms don't have. And so you would have to be, I would expect, a lot more ingenious, and use your ingenuity to think of different ways and really innovate a lot more than these bigger groups would. But why the Cape Valley? I'm really curious that there are so many of these kind of sustainability-oriented small farmers there. What attracted them all to that place? What shared qualities and traits do they have that have contributed to their success as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's definitely a lot to learn from the farmers here. Historically, Cape Valley followed a similar pattern of the small farms going into decline. But then I think because there are small land holdings here, this kind of the geography of the valley, big agribusiness didn't really take hold. And meanwhile, people, in the 70s and 80s who, had this impulse to go back to the land and begin experimenting with innovative methods and organic agriculture. They found their way here. Part of it was, being close to San Francisco as a market and a progressive place. And there's also UC Davis, which is close by and is a big, agricultural research center. People like Paul and Drew met there at UC Davis, and then, when looking for land, just found Capay Valley as a place nearby. Of course, there's the Cache Creek with a good water source and a variety of reasons. And then their shared qualities, like we were just talking about, this creativity that, again, because they're on these smaller parcels that, they're not easily just going to expand into, this wide, flat, agriculture that you might find in the Central Valley and in the Midwest. People here really had to be creative. And as Paul Muller was saying, creativity really happens from the bottom up most of the time, not from the top down. So it's these, farmers who are in the field and working at a scale that really requires them to rethink and bring new ideas. And all of these people really, like I said, have a love of place and wanting to be stewards of the land.
It sounds like an idyllic place, and I'm also struck by what you said earlier about how everybody there, all these small farmers, seem to really enjoy their job. They really have a passion for what they're doing. It's not drudgery for them. And I think a lot of people might find that surprising coming from a farmer.
Yeah, I think I did, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like they have found something that the vast majority of humans are still looking for.
Yeah, part of it is that, every day there's something new, and every year. So, there's a lot of problem solving that farmers told, some of them told me, I really enjoy the problem solving aspect of this profession. And then, like we're finding out that just being active as opposed to sitting at a desk is so much healthier. So, yeah, even, to what I would see as what looked like such exhausting work, but these people are often in good health because of that work. So it works out.
So interesting, because so much of what kind of took away that work, the automation and all that, was promised to save mankind from drudgery. It sounds like it kind of took away something that we needed, in a sense. I'm not saying we all need to work hard, but it's deeply satisfying, I think, to be connected to the land. I'm not a farmer, but I do have my own garden, and that's deeply satisfying for me. And they've already done research that shows people who garden and have their hands in the dirt are actually happier. So I think that's definitely one aspect of it, but it also sounds like these people really understand the value of what they're doing for the planet and for people, which is a very big deal, to really feel like you're having a positive impact on the world.
Yeah,
don't you think?
Definitely. And that is, I don't know how unique it is to this place. There's a lot of other, great people doing service and action, but there are definitely some key players here who see the value of forming these relationships with, not only with their customers, but with the general public, and staying active on, organizations such as the California Farm Bureau or, the farmers market boards, or, wherever they can.
Are there any specific methods that kind of stuck out to you that these farmers are using that, say, perhaps the more traditional farmers could learn from?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So each farm in my book has its own chapter, and I tried to pick different farms that highlighted different agricultural methods and also different business models. One that listeners might be familiar with are the CSAs, community-supported agriculture. And there were people here that were really on the forefront of investigating that model, experimenting with it. Cape A Organic and Full Belly Farm both had, in the late 70s, early 80s, this idea of having subscribers who then get a box of fresh produce every week. And so that's one, model that has been really helpful. And then there's also other kinds of direct marketing to customers and even mail order. So like my neighbor across the street has the Cache Creek Lavender Farm, and he goes to farmers markets, and then he's also, mailing out things to people. I know, a few farmers that are doing that. Yeah, and then, of course, the idea of the value-added products that are really helpful for farmers, livestock farmers that I know who are, making their own jerky or their own bone broth, that, that, of course, makes a more valuable product to the consumer, and the farmer is, making more money off of those. And those are all, pretty common. Some of the more fringe ideas would be maybe like Pasture 42's herd share dairy operation. So they, have a small family dairy, which is, those are really in decline, but they're having great success at it because, well, they've found a way to market directly, again, similar to the CSA, where people subscribe. They actually buy a portion of a cow, and then they are given the milk from that cow. So it's just a different legal model. They're not selling this milk to the public. They're selling it directly to people who've hired them to produce the milk.
That is brilliant. How ingenious. Because, of course, they're getting around some of the more restrictive laws about how people aren't allowed to sell raw milk.
Yeah, the dairy industry has a big lobbying group, and so, yeah, there's been a lot of problems with that for small farmers.
Right, and you bring up a topic that I think is really important, and that is so many of these kind of regulations that we ostensibly believe are to save the public health are often really a result of just really good lobbying from industrial agriculture or industrial dairy farmers or whoever that have the money and can pay the lawyers and can pay the lobbyists and make sure that certain things are outlawed that would be not so good for their business.
Yeah, and in some of my conversations with farmers, they've talked about how, like, the food safety regulations put a real hardship on small farmers, and a lot of the food safety issues come from when there's huge agribusiness of, let's say the spinach, it was just coming from these huge farms and being shipped and going into these huge processing facilities. And so small farmers are having to deal with the same regulations as those that are dealing with that huge industry, whereas spinach that I'm buying from a small farmer is not being subjected to the same risk. Eventually, I would hope that we could come up with a way to distinguish regulation for large agriculture versus smaller farms.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it makes a lot of sense to me because it's two different animals, That would make a lot of sense to me. When you're doing industrial agriculture or industrial farming, there are many risks that you have that you wouldn't have on a smaller scale. The two should be treated separately. Hopefully, as these small farmers grow in number, that will be addressed. I'm hoping, because I will tell you, if I had the opportunity to purchase part of a cow so that I could get that milk, I would do it in a heartbeat. Or even just, purchase part of a cow to get the beef later on. It seems so much more simple, much healthier when you're dealing directly with that food producer rather than going through all the middlemen that come between us and our food normally,
Yeah, I really stopped drinking milk for many years, and now just in the last few years since Pasture 42 came here to Cape Valley, I've been really happy to drink milk again.
Yeah, I bet your diet's just off the charts as far as health goes. So I'm just curious, on a personal note, do you have a garden, or do you just, take advantage of all these wonderful small farmers there in the Cape Valley to get your nutrition?
Yeah, that's kind of funny because I'm married to a farmer. He used to be an organic farmer, and so he can't help himself and has, a big garden, and so we live on a homestead where we produce a lot of our own food, and we also grow olives commercially, and we have a few old walnut trees that do okay, and we sell olives and walnuts. But yeah, I was laughing because, really, it would make more economic sense for us to just buy food from our local farmers at the farm stand on Wednesday and Friday. But again, we do it for other reasons.
I know for me, I just like having that security. To me, it's a bit of an insurance to have be able to grow your own food, regardless of what other people are doing, what's happening with the supermarkets or whatever. You've always got a source of healthy food there. So maybe your husband does it just because it makes him feel good, because it makes me feel good going out there and working with my plants and such.
Yeah, he calls it sport gardening. It's his workout.
I totally relate. So what you've done, I think, is really interesting, is highlighting these different business models, these different ways that these small farmers can compete, and taking advantage of their smallness, being that direct provider of food to their clients, not having the middlemen involved, I think is really exciting. Anytime that we can bring it more to a local level, we get rid of so much of the vulnerability that we have to our food supply. And it turns out it's better for us, and it's better for the planet as well. So I'm excited that you named some really cool business models that I think would be really inspiring to even just the folks that are listening here. Even if you have a big garden or you want to just use your yard, there's some of those models could give people an idea of things they might want to do to try to make a living off of their land. I think that's really inspiring. Were those models surprising to you? Because I imagine you probably hadn't seen those kinds of ideas before.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot that I learned in this process of writing this book. I thought I knew, some of these farmers pretty well, and but yeah, I didn't want to just focus on the farming methods, and so in exploring the business models, that there's such a diversity here of business models that I was surprised to uncover. Yeah, it has really had a small effect as it grows outward, especially from interns that come here to Cape Valley for a year or two, and it's interesting to see what some of those people have done as they've left the Cape Valley. Some of them have gone to the Midwest where there's just corn and soy, and they've started these small organic vegetable farms and been able to supply, people there with good vegetables, and found success in that. And I just was visiting some friends up in Oregon who have a cooperative with 5 other farms to put together a CSA, since none of them had large enough farms to make up a whole, subscription box for customers. So Yeah, there's other places out there even, pushing the envelope with different models, and it's really exciting to hear about those.
Yeah, I imagine. It sounds like because of the proximity of San Francisco is such a big city, and so many of the people there are so interested in healthier alternatives and slow food and local food production, that you've got just this built-in market there for market gardeners.
Most of the farmers I'm interviewing are, a little bit bigger scale than that. Yeah,
But
definitely.
they do have relationships with the folks that they're selling to. Like, I mean, because you were talking about San Francisco and how that has really helped spur the small farmers there in the Capay Valley.
Right. Yeah. It's like one example would be, early on when Full Belly first started growing here, Alice Waters from Chez Panisse restaurant came, looking for, organic, well, probably just fresh vegetables that weren't available in the stores, and she, she found this farm and, was able to buy this really small baby lettuce that was just, so unique, and, nobody else had that at the time. So it was a relationship. I mean, the farm wouldn't have known that she wanted the small baby lettuces. They weren't really marketing it, but it was just, through a relationship, they were able to create this market. And yeah, some of that is still happening today, definitely, with direct relationships with chefs and grocers.
Yeah, well, that's exciting. I mean, I'm sure as a small farmer would be very excited to hear of a customer specifically seeking out a small sustainability-oriented farm so that they could get a specific kind of produce. Because normally it's the other way around, right? We're looking for somebody to purchase our stuff, but this just illustrates, in my opinion, the demand that is happening here. That these chefs or these restaurants really specifically looking for something that they can't easily find now.
Yeah, so that has really been, something that has saved a lot of these farms, is really that direct relationship. That's a great example of just rethinking how the small farms can work.
Yeah. Now, we haven't really touched on actual farming methods. Do you go into that a bit in the book?
A little bit, yeah. Some permaculture methods that versus, just organic. And then, I do have some conventional farmers too that are mentioned here, but mostly I'm focusing on the business models.
Yeah, well, we're quite familiar with permaculture here. We talk a lot about it, just even using it in our own gardens, in our own yards and such. And for me, I've always been struck. I just fell in love with it immediately, just for having the opportunity to give something back to Mother Earth instead of just always taking.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, to me, that's the ultimate in being a steward of the land. And it's so exciting that there's a group of people there that are so dedicated to that. And also they're finding ways to do it that's really good business. And it's different than what we've done in the past. But hey, I can imagine some of these methods you're talking about even being applied to things that aren't agriculture. If you can find a way to deal directly with your customers instead of having middlemen to go through, I think that's a plus for everybody.
Yeah, like I have some friends who are really exploring that with the fashion industry, and I have a chapter in the book about Sally Fox, who is an organic cotton breeder and farmer. But then I also just know of, like, a good friend of mine was just a graduate of fashion design school in San Francisco and is looking to create a line that is locally produced clothing. So yeah, I agree that this direct connection to to everything that you're buying is hopefully going to be a wave of the future.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like your book really highlights this and could be really good reading for anybody who wants to explore different kinds of business models that do not involve massive industry lobbying and basically corporate kinds of methods. I think that this sounds really exciting.
One thing that we haven't quite touched on that you'll find in the book is really how community can really make or break a small farm, and how Cape Bay Valley has worked in different ways to really support community here.
Well, could you share a little bit of some of those examples of how community has supported the farming industry there?
Yeah, well, it's more about how the farmers have worked to really create community together, in several different ways. They're, helping each other with getting products to market, like sharing a delivery truck run would be one example. And then also just creating this, Cape Bay Valley brand and working to get, this reputation for the whole valley, not just for their own farm. That's been really crucial, I think, to helping everybody here grow. So it just, really looking at how they can work together despite differences. It's been really a part of how Cape Bay Valley farmers have been able to survive.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love hearing stories like that. Because honestly, we're so oriented towards competition, No, working together is not something you hear about very much. You just hear about people competing.
I guess in one way, there's a large enough market out there that they can afford to have some cooperation.
Well, hopefully that's something that we're all going to be seeing more and more of in the future. I really do hope. I think it's happening. So hey, we're coming close to the end of our time here together, Elvira, and I was wondering if there's anything that we've missed that you might want to share a little bit more about the book and what you think people will get out of it.
What I found is that farmers can really be, they're not just stewards of the land, but farmers can also really be, our connection to the environment as a whole, and be like diplomats, for the earth. And
so they're ambassadors.
That's the word I was looking for.
Ambassadors between humans and the land, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to me that more and more we're going to be looking at these folks to lead us into the future, because they're the ones who are innovating. They're the ones who are finding these smaller ways of moving in the economic world so that when one thing fails, the rest continue on. It's not like a too big to fail thing. And community being involved in that, collaborating. I get really excited when I hear about all this.
Yeah. So I'm really hoping that my book will help to, create a more empathic public, so that we can all work together to create healthier farm policies and just healthier consumer patterns.
Well, it sounds like you've made a big step forward on that path. And I want to thank you for that. And I also would like to ask you if you could share how people can get the book. How can people get the book, and how can people learn and follow more of what you're doing, or possibly contact you?
Yeah, well, we are on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter under Why We Farm. And I have a website called whywefarmcape.com. Cape is spelled with a C. The book is going to be out next week, I think, with Amazon, and also, looking at, distributing it to bookstores. And so it's just all coming together really this month. So it's very exciting.
Okay, well, great. Well, we'll include links to all of that in the show notes. And again, I want to thank you very much, Elvira, for coming on the podcast and sharing your experiences. And sounds like you're providing inspiration for a lot of people, not just small farmers, but people that are interested in sustainable living and sustainability. Sounds like they could really learn a lot from these small farmers of the Capay Valley that you highlight in your book. So thank you for that as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Denise. It's been great talking to you and making this connection to people who are interested in sustainable living. Thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, very happy to do it and happy to meet folks like you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Sustainable Living Podcast today. If you like what you heard, please consider going over to patreon.com and supporting us with a donation there. Take care.